Well, I'd like to go to sort of another question, actually, if we could. Yesterday, during the big panel session, you mentioned a particularly good story about finding a key document for the Coram Nobis cases. I was wondering if you could recall that story for us again, finding the 10th copy, as it were.
Oh yes, the book.
The book, yes.
In 1943, General DeWitt, who was the commanding general of the Western Defense Command, who was greatly responsible for the exclusion of Japanese Americans, wrote a book called Final Report, Japanese Evacuation from the West Coast, 1942. Actually, his name appears as the author, but we know that it was Colonel Carl R. Bendetson who did the writing. I mean, you can tell, there's just no question about it when you read when you go through the archives, that he was the total architect. And I think Colonel Bendetson was also the architect of Executive Order 9066. We have some documents that almost unquestionably, I don't think you even have to read between the lines to realize that it was he who, in conjunction with Mr. McCloy and Provost Marshal General Goulian, they are the makers of EO 9066. Mr. Roosevelt just signed it, but of course he approved of it, so he signed it. Okay, now General DeWitt wrote this report, and I'm going to use the word, I don't think I want to use DeWitt, I think I'm going to use Bendetson, because I think he's primarily responsible. The final report, in the name of General DeWitt, was written by Bendetson. Okay, I'm repeating that. Okay, in 1943, 10 copies of this report were printed. Type was set, but only 10 copies, bound like a finished product. And Colonel Bendetson and General DeWitt were so sure that it was such a wonderful report that they told the printers, don't break down the type, just leave it as it is, we're going to give you orders for more prints. Well, they sent copies, 3 copies, to the Secretary of War, 3 copies to Chief of Staff George Marshall, and copies to Mr. McCloy, Assistant Secretary of War McCloy, and or 2 copies, I guess. And they saved a couple of copies in the Western Defense Command headquarters at Presidio, San Francisco. Okay. When Mr. McCloy saw this report, he hit the ceiling. He said, some of the statements in this report do not reflect the policy of the War Department. And it was not right for the general to make these statements without clearing with us. And so he called long distance Mr. McCloy, who was in charge of the Japanese question for the War Department. And Mr. Stimson, the Secretary of War, did everything Mr. McCloy said, because he felt this was the expert, he's going to take care of it. Well, Mr. McCloy called Mr. Bendetson, Colonel Bendetson, and raised hell with him. Said, how, you can't do this. This report is just nothing but a self-serving, self-aggrandizement document for the general. And besides, there's several things he says in here that show what happened to the Japanese Americans was based on racism, bigotry. And we cannot have an official document with an approval of the War Department stamp on it, published for public consumption, for international reading, that's full of this kind of nonsense. Even though Mr. McCloy may have believed that all the things written in there, he didn't want it in print for ridicule and for criticism later. And one of the things, for example, that I did not mention during the session that Mr. McCloy objected to was that the report said Japanese Americans were removed from the West Coast because no matter how long it took, we would never be able to determine whether or not they are loyal to the United States. Now, Mr. McCloy said, now, if that is not a racist bigot, bigoted statement. What is? And Mr. General DeWitt's statement also said, well, we didn't have time to separate the sheep from the goats. And that put us in such a category of subhuman nature. Even Mr. McCloy objected to that. The other thing the statement said was that we want to keep these people, anybody with Japanese blood, 1/16 Japanese blood, in these camps for the duration of the war. And as I mentioned yesterday, Mr. McCloy was horrified at that idea because he wanted to clean out the camps right away, as soon as possible. He wanted them to be relocated outside the military zone and to start homes elsewhere, because by the end of the war, he did not want some conditions comparable to Native Americans' reservations, having Japanese American reservations, that the government would be responsible for taking care of. And he was determined that the camps would be closed as soon as possible. But he was trying to give General DeWitt some respect as a commander. However, this was just too much for him to take, and he was not pleased about the report. Okay, so he said to Colonel Van Dessen, I thought you were going to show me this report and let me approve it before you issued it. And he said, Van Dessen said, oh, don't worry, there's only 10 copies of these we printed. He said, and McCloy said, bound? Already finished? Colonel Van Dessen said, yes. We made arrangements with the printer that we're going to have more copies made, but I wanted to show you what a finished product looked like. So, well, Mr. McCloy was totally unhappy with not just those 3 or 4 things I told you about, but many other parts of the report. And so this began a series of memos and telephone conversations between the West Coast and the War Department in Washington as to the nature of the changes, the words to be changed, the phrases to be knocked out. And I knew that this had taken place because I saw a file. And I saw the file which included, after the corrections were made and the new version was printed, there was a warrant officer who was charged with making sure that anything having to do with the original version of the final report be destroyed, including galley proofs or everything. So I found this document signed by Warrant Officer Theodore J. E. Smith saying, I have witnessed the destruction of galley proofs, memos, letters having to do with the first version of the final report. Okay, so since I knew the history behind the fact that there was an original version, I had seen it, that was the only reason I recognized this particular book that was sitting on the corner of an archivist's desk that I was thumbing through. I looked at it and said, ooh, this looks like the final, DeWitt's final report. But I noticed in the margin many handwriting, delete, scratch, change to, move to page so-and-so. And oh my goodness, you know, this is one of the first versions. And this is the one that they could not locate. There had been 10 copies. Messages and cablegrams went back and forth between McCloy's office and the Western Defense Command saying, hey, we got 9 copies back. Where is the 10th copy? We've got to find it. Well, apparently they never found it. I never saw any document saying, here's the 10th copy. And it ended up somebody's office in the War Department. When everything was moved over to the archives, it got mixed in with all the papers that belonged to the War Department. Either the War Department downtown in Washington or Western Defense Command. I think it's the Western Defense Command because they worked from the notes to make the changes. So I recognized this as that the 10th copy that was missing And I told the archivist, I said, do you know what you have here? And he didn't know. He didn't realize, and I gave him a brief rundown. And I thought, he was really tickled about it, because there was it was supposed to have been lost, and here now he had it. And somebody said, well, why didn't he know about it?